Welcome to another episode of Silvie and Didy React. I'm Silvie.
And I'm Diddy. And Silvie, today we
Mhm.
are reacting to a article that
Okay.
I'm bringing you. So you've been bringing me stuff so far. I finally got something for you. But before we get into it, dear viewer, please like, share, and subscribe. All the YouTube stuff. I think I probably messed that up, but let's keep going. So, Sylvie, the article that I have for you
Mhm.
today, um, is more in the Christian sphere,
Mhm.
and they have recently unearthed a new archaeological find that is
Mhm.
supposed to be significant. So I wanted to get your reactions because I know you're more of a history nut than I am.
Mhm.
So I'm very curious what your thoughts are on it.
Sounds good.
Okay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring that up. Okay, are you seeing that?
Give me a second. I'm seeing it.
Awesome. Okay. So our headline here is the earliest Jesus is God inscription found deemed the greatest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I kind of want to stop here,
Mhm.
partly for my understanding, but also for the context of a viewer who may not be familiar with the
Mhm.
Dead Sea Scrolls. Sylvie, can you give us a quick pitch of the what the Dead Sea Scrolls are and their historical significance to
Sure
Christians?
thing. So the Dead Sea Scrolls refers to a ton of manuscripts, which are just handwritten copies of some ancient document. And a bunch of them were found in caves near the Dead Sea, hence the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay.
And before that time, like a lot of the manuscripts that we had were later copies, they were smaller copies, but then apparently this shepherd boy was throwing rocks and he heard this crash and he came in and found all of these jars that held these scrolls, and historians have gone gaga over them because they're earlier manuscripts that have a lot of the materials that we'd find in both the Old and the New Testament.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're old manuscripts of the Bible that are more complete than other
Mhm.
ones that we had at the time.
Yes.
Okay.
And they've been preserved. So it's like this sense of like you have kind of multiple written copies that collaborate or corroborate a given fact or detail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that helps us be sure that, this particular phrasing and this particular chapter of the Bible, we're actually pretty certain that this is original. It's not like someone many years later throwing something in, stuff like that.
Exactly. Like, so one of the big arguments that people would sometimes throw out is like the church at some point destroyed all of the like bad gospels and then they gave you the
Oh,
correct gospels, and like, here's some revisionism that we can do, and the monks are copying all of the scripts, so they're gonna, cross this out, write this in.
I see.
Um, so when you have something that's independent of that chain of like documents, it
Hmm.
gives you greater confidence that what you're
I
reading
see.
like is, yeah, what was written.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So then with that context, let's dive into the greatest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, if only these floors could talk. Scientists are going gaga over the earliest inscription declaring Jesus is God, claiming that this 1800-year-old engraving could change our understanding of Christianity. The mosaic is the greatest discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls, declared Carlos Campos, CEO of the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., where the theologically significant relic has been housed since July, the Jewish News Syndicate reported. Dubbed the Megiddo Mosaic, the 581-foot artifact was originally underneath a floor of the Megiddo prison in Israel in 2005 after which it was excavated in pieces by the Israel Antiquities Authority over the course of 4 years. It had reportedly adorned a private chapel in 230 AD that was reportedly the earliest known house of prayer, according to Gil Lynn, the head of the Megiddo Regional Council. Inscribed on the mosaic are Greek words, the God-loving Akeptos has offered the table to God, Jesus Christ, as a memorial. Lynn described this as the first physical proclamation of Jesus Christ as God, the Daily Mail reported. The mosaic presents groundbreaking physical evidence of the practices and beliefs of early Christians, including the first archaeological instance of the phrase God, Jesus Christ, seconded the exhibition's curator, Allegre. We'll just call that person Allegre. Okay. This was significant as the artifact declared JC as God before Christianity became part of the Roman Empire, JNS reported. Megiddo, which was designed by a craftsman named Brutus, also features some of the earliest depictions of fish, one of the trademark symbols of the Messiah in Christian theology. So here's a closer up shot of the fish at the
Mhm,
center of the mosaic. So we'll get back to that
mhm.
in a second, but I'll finish reading. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verse 16, in the Bible, Jesus notably multiplied 2 fish and several loaves of bread to feed 5,000 people. Also included was a reference to Gaianus, the Roman officer who commissioned the title during the Roman occupation of Judea. This, along with the mosaic's proximity to a Roman camp, suggested that the Romans coexisted with Christians to some degree, despite the notorious tales of bloodshed and violence involving the two factions. This is arguably one of the most important archaeological discoveries for understanding the early Christian church, said Bobby Duke, director of the Scholars Initiative at the Museum of the Bible. Truly, the mosaic presents a wealth of new data for church historians. To wit, the pieces include the name of 5 women: Pramila, Syriaca, Dorothea, Creste, and Akeptos, the latter of whom was shouted out for donating a table to the prayer hall. The mosaic underscores the crucial role of women in the early church, deduced Duke. After the Museum of the Bible's exhibition concludes in July 2005, the hallowed floor decor
25
will return to Israel, where it will be showcased at the exact site where it was exhumed.
concludes in 2025.
Yeah, July 2025
Yeah.
is when, um, so it will, currently it's in DC at the
Mhm.
Museum of the Bible, and it will head back to Israel in 2025. Did I say that wrong?
You said 2005, which
Wow.
is when they
Okay. Oh,
unearthed it.
thank you.
So
I was like, why are we
fact checking in real
double
time
checking
here,
that?
Diddy.
Thank you, Silvie. Yeah, my brain just did not
No, it's
register
okay.
what I said there. Yeah. So I'll just land here on this full
Hmm.
shot of the mosaic. But yeah, I'm curious what your initial thoughts are on this archaeological find.
It's just like hopeful optimism. I tend not to get too excited at the beginning of like when something is revealed. It's like, oh, this
Mhm.
is it. Like this proves it. But it's pretty cool. And I think it mentioned it as like over 500 feet artifact, which includes this mosaic and I'm sure all the surrounding stuff. And it's like,
Right.
yeah, the chances that a few monks, managed to forge the 500-foot mosaic that underlies one of the early chapels, a little more far-fetched. So
Right.
uh, it is cool to see that. And it is cool. Like one of the things that people tend to argue is that Jesus as God is this late idea. It develops, if not later in the Gospels, then later when Rome controls the church and they're like, hey, we're just going to make everybody follow this thing. But like early Christians really just believed that he was a good teacher, but like they didn't believe that he was God. And it's like, well,
Okay.
this mosaic would seem to contradict that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So the idea specifically, and I think I've heard this argument where if you actually look at the things that Jesus says, he
Hmm.
doesn't just outright tell people that he is God.
Right.
Now, usually my reaction to that is, well, Jesus says some very strange things like I was sent by the Father,
Yeah.
like I am the way, the truth, and the light. There's
Yeah.
um no other I'm messing
No
it
one
up
comes
now.
to the
But
Father
basic
except through me. Like that's
yes.
pretty
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like it feels like Jesus is saying that he's God, but here we at least have early Christians seemingly saying, yeah, Jesus is God. So
Yeah. God Jesus, you know. That guy. So yeah, that's my take. And I think that it opens your eyes if you are willing to see. And like this is the same thing true of like a lot of Paul's writings, which actually come earlier. So in Philippians, for example, that is an earlier document than the Gospels because Paul is writing earlier, and then like the Gospels are written later when there's like we've got to encapsulate all that we've been teaching you since Jesus rose from the dead,
right.
so that this can be passed on.
Hmm.
And even within that, there's a hymn which is believed to be even older than Paul's writings. It's like dating to around the time that Jesus rose, where it's like saying that Jesus is in very nature God, which that's as close as you can get to saying I'm God without saying I'm God. You know,
Right.
for playing Christian taboo, that's it's pretty clear, and I think anybody could
Hmm.
guess if they're looking at that. But yeah, I think that that's something that, and then just like I'll finish my rambling and then I'll let you talk. But one of the things that I notice is that something like this, a lot of people are always looking for that one piece of evidence that will settle things. And I think that that can sometimes be naive. So, like,
Hmm.
you know, it could be that we misunderstood the inscription and, like, there's something watered down. And so, like, don't place all your eggs in this one basket. But on the other hand,
Hmm.
um, even if this says everything that we hope that it will say, um, that doesn't mean that Richard Dawkins will have to confess Christ tomorrow and like, everything
Right,
is
right.
said and done because I think that if you have a mind not to believe, so if there's confirmation bias, there's disconfirmation bias, and you can disconfirm anything that you have a mind to disconfirm. And so that's more just as a cautionary tale of like this won't settle it, but this is still pretty freaking
Hmm.
cool.
Right. Yeah, yeah. I was about to say, so we're not going to have atheists and agnostics bowing down to Christ because an ancient mosaic declares he's God.
Yeah.
Okay. I was
That's my
I was
prediction.
hoping, yeah, I was hoping, like you said, Richard Dawkins would say, "Oh, now we have a Christian backsplash." That's what I was waiting for.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I
Uh,
think that's very true. This isn't necessarily something that is going to be that extra piece of information that
mhm.
will convince someone to convert that otherwise wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But as a Christian interested in historical findings, like you said, this is just really cool. And that was my initial reaction. My initial reaction was, this seems really cool. An ancient thing, one of the earliest pieces of physical evidence where the church actually declares that Jesus is God.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool from a Christian perspective. But then, um, so I am kind of curious what you think about that claim. This is the greatest finding since the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Um, I and this is like my limited historian, like historical knowledge. I would actually agree with it. And the reason that I say that is because I think a lot of the historical finds that you could get would be earlier copies of the Christian manuscripts,
Okay.
but a lot of that is already the Bible. And I think people will be like, well, yeah, duh, the Bible's going to say that because it's the Bible. Um,
Yeah.
but this is something different. Like, I think that like when you hear kind of archaeological finds of like, oh, shoot, like this, milestone references Pontius Pilate. And it's just like, oh shoot, like, there's something that's outside of the manuscripts that I treat as holy and like true that confirms this.
Mhm.
And so the fact that it's such a big thing, so like
Mhm.
once again, like this is a whole chapel floor. Um, like this isn't just a small like, oh, there was a coin and somebody, vandalized it and said like Jesus is God.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
this is something big and it's hard to ignore. So I would agree
Right.
that I think that that's a pretty huge find.
Cool.
Um,
So what you're saying then is the fact that so we have obviously with the Dead Sea Scrolls we have manuscript evidence
yeah,
for that supports the Bible going way back.
yeah,
And then there are also certain Roman historians that, at the very least, mention Jesus. And, so we're certain that Jesus was at least a real person. You can't, you definitely can't argue that.
right,
And then obviously with the Bible evidence, Christians say, well, he was more than just a man. Um, but with this floor, this is an extra biblical source. So it's like
yes,
it's not from the Bible. It is from Christians, so there is that.
yes,
That's one perhaps dock against it because the Roman historians don't have a vested interest in Christianity. So
right,
them mentioning Jesus, people kind of chalk that up as like, oh, that's even more evidence. So this is coming from Christians, but
right.
it's still outside of the Bible.
Well, and
Uh,
I will say this. I think
right.
the purpose of this evidence, it's like it's important to like have a focus on like what this proves and what it doesn't prove.
Hmm.
So this is not like the knockdown, drag out proof that like Jesus rose from the dead,
Right.
and that he's God, because I don't think that that kind of evidence is likely to happen if you're not set on believing like you're not going to believe a mosaic, let alone a piece of paper that says so.
Right.
But what I will say is I think this does disprove the hypothesis of like latent, Jesus God, where it's like, oh, that trickles in later, and like the
Okay.
Romans kind of do that. I think this is pretty hard proof, especially like it seems like it's verified because they unearthed it in 2005 and now they're telling us, but it's like if they can accurately date this, if this like was a thing, I think it's pretty evident that they did not have late Jesus as God, you know, uh, introduction later
Yeah.
on. I think that this was something that was so well established. You'd put it on a mosaic, in your
Yeah.
church. Like
Yeah.
it's not just something that's like, oh, like we'll rewrite it in like the late
Hmm.
300s or something. Like, no,
Hmm.
that's just like the evidence does not show
Hmm.
that, and it disproves that. So like if you do grapple with Christianity, I think kind of in the C.S. Lewis aspect, like you have to grapple with him as claiming that he's Lord and Savior, as claiming that he is divine.
Okay.
And you
Yeah.
can't just deal with him as like, oh, he's a nice teacher.
Right.
So I think this is evidence of that. Like you have to
Cool.
confront historical Jesus as a historical Jesus who claimed divinity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for some reason, I think you had basically said that already, but the way you said that again, hmm,
Hmm.
you solidified it even more as a really cool finding. So
Yeah.
before we start talking about this for an hour, I think we can just end the conversation on that note and let that be the last word because that was really well said.
Well,
So,
thank you, Diddy.
yeah.
Be
Okay,
sure
so
to like, share, and subscribe to this video if you want to see more like it. And you can email Diddy or myself. The emails will be on the description below. And we hope to see you again.
see ya.